Can I start with you, Klara, actually, and then we'll come back?
Sure. What's actually quite interesting is recently I went to Liverpool to the International Slavery Museum, where there's a really interesting exhibition on the Congo using some of the historical material of Anti-Slavery International. And the interview and the materials that are connected with that are over 100 years old. And then they were talking about modern day slavery. So that is quite interesting that, modern day slavery is something that keeps repeating. And what it means is it's a different phase, and if you will, a different method of enslavement. So indeed, very rarely do we see people who are in shackles or who are tied through ropes or through chains. But what we see is sophisticated methods of control and abuse of power. And it often takes form of psychological pressure, threats, manipulation, using people's vulnerability. The vulnerability can be associated with the fact that the person is of a particular gender, of a particular age, of a particular background, or because the person is in irregular immigration status, which is often the technique of traffickers. And then what they know is that the person is unlikely to run away, because even if they keep the doors open, they will say, well, if you run away, you will get deported and you will be detained. And unfortunately, that's what happens to a lot of people. You run away, you run for your life, and you end up in the Yaroswood Immigration Detention Center, which is often a situation that's very similar to a situation that people have endured with the traffickers. So it's something that people often do not understand because of the absence of chains. But the chains and the control is often psychological. So people really have their chains, if you will, in their minds, and they understand that there will be repercussions if they try to run away or if they refuse to do what they are being forced to. And that is the very modern, if you will, face of slavery, and that is the methods and the coercion that is used by those who enslave in the 21st century.
And you, Marissa, are the living example on the stage here of what the modern domestic slave looks like.
Yes, we are currently dealing with this big problem with the absence of what in connection to what been said, and I find it really hard to deal with, because at the moment I would receive a call, from in the middle of the night, and those domestic workers who managed to escape abuse, and finding out that there's no redress for them, they couldn't change employer, they automatically become undocumented once their 6 months visa ended. And they also hide, and we find it very hard. We couldn't, of course, bring them to the police. Even we are in the situation that we know they are being raped, we know they are being beaten, because they will call me what's happening to them, and we will go there and rescue them by taxi in the middle of the night. And we just need to put her in another place, in shelter where we could shelter among us domestic workers. But to bring them to the police, we couldn't do that, because they know they will be arrested, they will be detained, they will be deported. And they just ended up working from one employer to another, knowing these employers, they are already undocumented. And the more they don't pay them, the more they will abuse them. And this is where we are now, actually. And this is what they call the modern slavery.
And of course, when it comes to children, you don't need these shackles. If you think of Victoria Climbier and you think of Ikwamosa, the boy whose torso was found in the Thames that I did that documentary on, you don't need the shackles, you don't need them, because they're young children, they're 4 or 5 years old. They're not going to run. They're not going to run,
but they're not going to run. They probably trust you that, yes, of course, you will look after them, because after all, you're an adult, and that's what adults do, they look after children. So, I mean, it's unfortunate that, we find ourselves in situations where adults who are meant to be, guarding children and looking after them, and we've become their abusers in this sense. But there's something else I really wanted to touch on in relation to what my two colleagues said, and that's in relation to the invisible forms of shackles that we're seeing. We're seeing cases, and there have been a number of cases here in the UK, where young girls have been made to go through some oath rituals or juju or witchcraft, witchcraft ceremonies. Thank you, the word failed me. Sunday morning, sorry. Ceremonies. And essentially, this is just to psychologically, it's a different form of psychological, shackle, whereby they're told that, okay, yes, you've agreed to come, or even if you haven't agreed to come, you're going to be helped by this person, and they're going to do this for you, they're going to do that for you. But when you do get there, you cannot betray them, you cannot do anything that will harm them. They're your benefactor, they're helping you. And of course, you have to swear. And the swearing can take many different forms. So for example, it could be, we've seen cases where young girls have been made to shave off their heads, or to shave off their, the pubic hair, or, or their nails, or provide other bodily objects like, their blood, menstrual blood, or sleep in coffins. I mean, some of the ceremonies are absolutely horrific. But these young girls have been made to go through that. And because even the young girls themselves believe that, yes, this is what we do in my village, for example. So if I go against what they've said, horrible things will happen to me. So when they do get here and they find that they're actually not working in a hairdresser's salon like they've been promised, but they're actually working as a sex slave, and they're thinking of running away. The thought perishes because they remember that they've been through some, serious ceremony that actually binds them permanently to the trafficker. So we're seeing that a lot as well. Now, that's very different from 12 years as a slave. There are no shackles involved, but a young person can actually spend a longer time than 12 years attached to the trafficker because of the juju and the ritual that they've gone through.
And one of the threats that they use to bind them as well is that the family back home in Benin or wherever it is,
in Nigeria,
will be suffer. And that's often the real
Yeah.
clincher, isn't it?
Yeah.
I saw you writing quite a bit down there, Klara, so I'll let you come back before I move on to the next stage. I wanted to talk about the changes in the law, but what were you...
Sort of thinking about the historical parallels, and you've mentioned the year 12 Years a Slave, the film, and probably many of you would have seen it. What is really interesting in that film is that, despite the fact that it portrays a different period of time, the way some of the characters dealt with the situations of slavery is very much the same attitudes and the same behavior that is displayed to this day. People who choose to ignore facts, they choose to look away. And I think some of the things that we will be talking about later about, what is the situation and the evidence that shows that certain policies and laws might lead to risk of people being enslaved, yet these facts are ignored for a number of reasons. So I think even historical facts and historical parallels are really important, because all we do now and the methods of campaigning that my organization uses are very similar to the methods of campaigning that Thomas Clarkson used. Maybe we are not riding up and down England on a horseback, and we are not sort of collecting signatures on a long paper that would be rolled out in the parliament, but we are doing the same. We are collecting people's signatures, we are collecting people's opinions, and we are asking everybody to push with the government and to say this is unacceptable in the 21st century. So I think history can still teach us a lot on this particular issue.
Well, it's a good segue to talk about the modern slavery bill, but before we do, is there anybody from the floor that wants to ask anything before we move the... Yes, please do. Sorry, I can only just about see you, but I can see your hand there. Could we know who you are? Oh, there's a microphone. That's fantastic. Are you from an organisation?
No.
Okay.
My name is Deepa Patel. I was just very interested to hear about human trafficking. One of the things that I read about recently is that apparently in Mumbai in India, Mumbai in India has got some of the largest prostitute houses in the world, which sound very well established and involve, no doubt, human trafficking, and also enroll young people, and apparently they're shackled to actually break the person down to enable them to undertake a life in prostitution. And I wondered whether there were organisations that were putting any pressure on governments internationally to disband such organisations, or what kind of activities are being done in that regard. So
There's very
question I had.
Yeah, no, there is very much a train of thought that says the only way to deal with this problem and solve this problem is by tackling it in the source country. I don't know if you want to. I mean, that is very much a way of thinking, isn't it? That we will have to go to the source countries to tackle it. We can't tackle it here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many gaps in terms of addressing trafficking in the UK, but there's still some work being done. But one of the things that worry us as an organization is that if you look at the key countries where people are being trafficked from, so for example, we have Nigeria, we have China, we have Vietnam. I think those are the three top countries. There's possibly almost next to nothing being done in a country like Nigeria. Almost all the young people we see at AFRUCA, all the 20 young people we see each year are mainly from Nigeria. At least 95% of them are from that country. But there's very little being done in terms of prevention. And when I talk about prevention, I'm not just talking about radio jingles or newspaper adverts or billboards. I'm talking about how do we start to address the causes of trafficking, those conditions that make people vulnerable, to being trafficked, those conditions that will make a mother hand over her 8-year-old daughter to a total stranger because she wanted a better life for her. So we're not doing enough to tackle poverty. We're not doing enough to tackle corruption. I mean, I'm from Nigeria originally, and I say it openly that the main reason why we have so many victims of trafficking, in my viewpoint, is not even just because of the poverty. The poverty is a direct consequence of corruption in Nigeria, because Nigeria is absolutely rich. Nigeria is a lot richer than the UK, potentially. But there's still so much of it that, what trickles down is not enough to actually make any changes happen. So until we start to deal with the causes of poverty in such countries, people will keep being trafficked into countries like the UK.
Klara, I've not heard about this problem in Mumbai. That is news to me. It's the first time I've heard about that particular problem. But again, do you think it's the source country? We need to work more in conjunction with source countries to solve the problem.
I absolutely agree with what Debbie has said about some of the push and pull factors that make people seek better future, but also the connection with, non-existent rule of law and corruption, and that's something where we find quite a lot. But what we also need to remember is that trafficking doesn't always mean crossing international borders. And the example you gave from Mumbai, these are people who are trafficked within their own country. And again, there are huge disparities between people. Of course, issues like caste discrimination comes into place as well. And that makes it even more difficult. And that's also, interestingly, an issue that transpires and resonates in this country when you have victims who come from countries where there is an issue of caste discrimination. They face the same discrimination here again, which it makes it even more complicated. And what the important thing really is that trafficking is not about crossing of international borders. It's not about moving people. It's about exploitation and exploitation of people's vulnerability. And what we see increasingly is also cases of trafficking, internal trafficking within UK, of British nationals, men, women and girls. And it is not because they don't speak the language or because their immigration status might be precarious. It's because they are vulnerable for a particular reason and because their rights are not being properly protected. So it's important to work at the source, and the source might be a country, or it might be a situation of vulnerability or social exclusion in a particular country. So that makes it more difficult, but also makes us realize is that what we need to be asking for is if, for example, foreign aid and development aid is being distributed, that anti-trafficking and anti-slavery element is included in it, so that some of the differences and the inequalities are not reinforced, but are specifically targeted.
We'll be doing the modern slavery bill next, but just before we do, I just wanted to ask Marissa, I mean, should the British government be talking, or at least tackling the way that people from Saudi Arabia bring domestic staff to the UK? I mean, isn't that something that could easily be done?
I do acknowledge that the connection of both sending and host countries.
Yeah.
Because as for me, I try to go home and settle, because way back, you know, no mother would ever little children, 1, 2, 3, as mother of 3 children, 1 to 3 years old, and seeing the children being forced into prostitution in my own country. I come from Philippines, and see there is 3 children. I don't want that to happen to my own children, and I have to find a way. And the fastest way I could is to work abroad, and finding work back home is not enough to sustain the needs of my family. But years passed by. That was temporary plan, but I ended up working long term.
But that's my point, that often in Saudi Arabia, I'm not just pinpointing Saudi
Because
Arabia, they'll source the domestic staff in the Philippines and then they'll bring them to the UK.
Yeah, I came from
So
Singapore. You see how I travel, Singapore, Hong Kong, and then UK.
Right.
And I try to go home, but again, because my children are growing, they don't know me. I want to be with them. I want to be a normal mother like any other mother, that I work and I go home and I can see them, I can be with them, I can look after them myself. And I want that to happen, to be a normal mother. So I try to go home, and I sell food in front of our house with the little money I have. So I wake up 4 o'clock, go to market and buy food, and then come back 7 o'clock. So my children are already at school. And then that's a routine, and that was not enough. It's just for their food. I worry when they're sick. I worry what will be their future. They need to go to a proper school. So again, I try to work at night time. So from 5 o'clock, I left home and then go to the part-time and the evening work. So as a bookkeeper in a pub. And I come home, my children are already sleeping. So I don't see them. It's the same. And I don't have really much money to make sure that they will have a good future. So again, I was forced to leave them.
So it's poverty that
So
forced
it
you
is
to
very
take
important, you know, to also economically back home that this is being seen. And also in the UK, when we come here, like I have now my children here. Of course, I don't bring them immediately, you know, because I need to make sure that I can afford to provide for them for a living. And that should be seen as us, that we could actually be independent, you know, having the decent work.
I want to talk about the modern slavery bill, actually, and ask you if that helps. Of course, yes, we know it's the 3 Ps. It's prevention, protection, and prosecution. Okay, so it's the 3 Ps. Is it actually fulfilling its role? Let me just start here with you, Debbie.
We at AFRUCA, firstly, we're a member of the anti-trafficking monitoring group, which is led by anti-slavery and Klara's organization, and it's a coalition of about 10? 9 organizations working on human trafficking in the UK. So we did a joint submission to the cross committee working on it. And the key issue we looked at was around the lack of provision there for the protection of victims of trafficking, be it children or adults. It's completely absent, which is quite surprising because there's no way you can aim to address whether you call it modern-day slavery or human trafficking by law without actually making provisions to ensure that those people you're trying to protect can actually get protection. So it's a contradiction in time. So in my viewpoint, I think the bill is quite lacking in that sense. So there's a lot there around prosecution, but there isn't anything at all about how do we ensure that the victims of trafficking who come forward can be protected from further exploitation.
I'm going to come on to the changes in the visa, but we have seen an increase in prosecutions. So, I mean, it is doing part of its job.
Well, we haven't really seen a significant increase in prosecutions and convictions. If we think about the number of potential victims being around sort of 1,800, 2,000 in a year in the UK, yet the number of convictions is somewhere around 10 people. There is a huge disparity. And there is more reporting of trafficking and slavery cases. But the average sentence, it's a serious crime. It's a crime that carries sentence of up to 14 years. Now, majority of sentences you will see is around 2.5, maximum 5 years. And that's for serious violations of human rights, for violence, sometimes rape, people enslaved for a number of years, and the impact for them being for the rest of their lives. And it's also a crime that generates huge amount of profits. It's something that people enslave others to make money, and the money is huge. There was an estimate a few years ago by the International Labour Organization talking about $32 billion a year made out of trafficking. So it is huge money. And even if you don't make money, you get free labor. And imagine how much would that be if you were to pay for a full-time childcare in your home. How much does that cost? So if you don't pay that and you enslave somebody to do that, it is huge money. So I think it is really shocking, I must say, that the government has even published a draft bill that didn't take into account protection of victims, which is something that is internationally accepted. And there are countries in the world that are considered much less developed, yet their law, the text of their law is much better, much more progressive than the law that has been proposed in this country.
I know, Marissa, you don't feel the bill protects victims at all because it takes away their protection, their visas after 6 months.
Yes, we used to have this, and the UK are very proud of that. The overseas domestic worker visa, which actually proven the best prevention of trafficking. And that is gone now. And I do feel, I agree with what my colleague said, that there's no prevention and there's no redress as well. And the case of domestic workers, because the only available protection at the moment is the national, that they apply for the national referral mechanism. And for domestic workers, they find it really hard to be in this, in the situation.
If someone's brought in as a domestic worker, they've come in on a visa with their employer. Yeah. If they run away, they're then given a 6-month visa, but there's no automatic right to renewal.
It won't be renewed. And although they can apply for the national referral mechanism, but more often they refuse because they couldn't work if they are in the, and they are here, of course, to work. They need the family to support the family back home. Situation. And it's a very difficult situation that the moment we explain to them about that, they began to hide. And once they work underground, and this is the worst situation that we have. And we couldn't even, as much as we want to try to follow up what's happening to them, we couldn't. Only when although they keep my number, they will call me when they are in, that they couldn't escape, and we have to go and rescue them. That's the only thing, that they keep my number. But for us to really find out what's happening, because we need that we need the data and to be able to show. And even the Kalayan report is the domestic workers coming to register to Kalayan also dropped. And I think the only thing they have is they used to have 300 regular, but that is dropped to 29 under the tide visa. So you can see they are here, but they are hiding, and they are very scared.
So Debbie, as well, you're dealing with people on a one-to-one basis, and do you find that if they do run away, they don't want to enter the system because they fear they're going to be deported?
Well, that's very true. I mean, one of the things we do for young people is to refer them for legal support. Of course, we're now seeing that there is a cut in legal aid, which makes it more difficult for young people, women, children, men, to be able to access the right legal support so that they can actually, fight for a better status in the UK. But then, of course, there's also the national referral mechanism that Marissa talked about, which, just to simplify, because I don't think anybody can really explain it. It's the system whereby if a victim of trafficking is identified, they'll be referred into that system, the government system, for confirming if somebody is a victim of trafficking.
And how do they confirm if someone's a victim?
I
If
think
someone's run away, let's break this down.
Yeah.
If someone's run
If
away,
somebody runs away, and if somebody is able to find their way to my charity, for example, there are two pathways. We can refer them to a lawyer to say, look, maybe they can claim asylum under whatever article, or we can refer them to the government's anti-trafficking program, which helps victims of trafficking to be able to offer them protection so they can stay in the UK. Sometimes the asylum pathway takes a lot longer, or if the young person is currently homeless, for example, they have nowhere else to stay in the UK, the best thing to do in order to secure some immediate form of housing is to refer them into the NRM, because they will get automatic 45-day reflection period, they call it. Within those 45 days, what happens is that they're now given the opportunity of applying into the NRM. I fill out a form to decide if they're actually a potential victim of trafficking. So when they do that, the government might say, okay, fine, based on the little information you've provided at this stage, we believe you are a potential victim of trafficking. That's the first stage. And then it goes on to the second stage where it's more complicated. And then, of course, the government made its decision, which is final, which you cannot actually appeal. And that is that, no, actually, at this point now, on conclusive grounds, you're not a victim of trafficking, or you are a victim of trafficking. But there's a huge problem with the system. One of the views we have at our charity is that it seems that majority of the non-EU nationals that are being referred into the NRM, they might have the initial stage telling them that, yes, you're a potential victim of trafficking, but at the final stage, they're being told, no, actually, you're not a victim of trafficking. And the figures, they're not proportional. So you find that most of the non-EU nationals are being told they're not victims of trafficking. So one of the problems we have, for example, let me use Nigeria as an example again, because most of the young people we work with are from Nigeria. If we refer, say, 20 young people into the NRM, and by the end of the year, you will find that actually about 18 of them have been told that actually you're not a victim of trafficking. These are young people that the police have worked with, that charities have worked with, lawyers have worked with them. Everybody agrees, based on what they know, that this person has been through some very horrible experiences, that a genuine victim of trafficking. But the NRM, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, is run by the UKBA, is telling them, no. So we feel that there's more emphasis placed on the issue of immigration, rather than the fact that the people involved have been through some very horrible experiences as victims. So the system, in my viewpoint, doesn't see them as victims. It just sees them as, people who want to stay on in the UK because of their immigration status. So that's a huge issue there around, whether this NRM system is actually, fair.
It seems that the process is almost designed to stop people getting through
Yes.
rather than
Exactly.
allowing them to get.
Absolutely.
Do you agree, Klara? Let me just ask Klara to respond first, and then I'll come back to you. It does almost seem as though the system is designed to stop people from an immigration purpose point of view from getting through.
It is, and it's interesting because the data, the statistics speak for themselves. If, as Debbie has said, if you are EU national or a British national potential victim of trafficking, you have about over 80% chance that you'll be believed that you're a victim. If you are Chinese, Vietnamese or Nigerian, your chance is less than 20%. And these are people, most people who are engaged with expert individuals and organizations who know what trafficking is and who are able to identify the people. And yet, the assessment rate is such. And this is something that we have been looking at for the past 5 years. And the numbers haven't changed. And it's interesting because then, if you get legal representation for one of these Vietnamese children, let's say, for sake of example, generally they are then able to overturn that decision. But there is no right for them to appeal that. So what happens is they would either be at the threat of deportation, which can put them into huge danger, because if they're deported, the traffickers back home do not know whether they've cooperated with the authorities here. So they would be at risk, their families would be at risk. Or they choose to go underground, where either the traffickers find them or they go back to the traffickers, because while the traffickers are abusing them, they at least give them roof over their heads. So the system is not only trying to act as another sort of way how to cut the numbers of immigrants, but also it is a system that can contribute and perpetuates modern-day slavery, which is something that is really problematic, because the system that is supposed to be designed to assist victims is perpetuating the problem. And the important thing is also the link between good protection and the ability of people to participate in criminal proceedings. Unless you feel safe, unless you are supported, you are less likely to be willing to put yourself at risk and expose yourself to a very adversarial system. But what we know is when people feel safe, they are more than happy to participate in criminal proceedings, because they too do want to see the perpetrators being brought to justice. And there are some excellent examples. There was an example of a man called Anthony Harrison who was prosecuted a few years ago. It was the first case in which the juju rituals that Debbie was talking about were discussed in court and described as a mechanism of control. But it was only after about a year of hard work with the victims who have then agreed to be witnesses that this prosecution went through, and it was a significant one. So we know that, protection is not just there to ensure that people's rights are respected and then they're allowed to recover, but also it's important in curbing the crime and making sure that people are brought to justice, which at the moment is a huge issue, because impunity is widespread in this area.
Yeah, I just want to really raise this one, which connect, an actual case that we have. So she applied trafficking, and she said they're not trafficked. She's not trafficked. But then normally they report regularly every 2 weeks to UKBA, and she's doing that. But on that day, this one day that she reported, and she was arrested on that site. And she called me, and she was crying, "Ate, help me." So I was I'm also packing, because we prepared, we already contacted the lawyer, and she has the letter with her. Yeah. That she should, but they didn't look at the letter. They just arrested her and brought her to Yaleswood. And so I immediately called her solicitor. I said she was arrested.
They took her straight to Yarswood.
To Yarswood. And then the solicitor did something, and I think she was detained there for 4 days. So we managed to bring her out. And then the solicitor, of course, challenged the decision, and she won a 1-year leave to remain. Now, this is a big problem of, after this 1-year leave to remain, whether she can renew, she can extend, that is still a big question mark. And that is a big problem. And also being very vulnerable, she find it hard to all this experience that she gone through in the UK, being detained, being abused by many employers, and to recover fully, and although we are here, we share each other, but the period of time, by the time she finished this 1 year, she hasn't even found a better job, although she can work,
so
but also that's a very short time, and also, but it's a question of what we shall do after this 1 year. Is she going to be undocumented again? She gonna be deported? So this is a problem of not giving, redress, the right to have better protection, better rights as workers in the UK. This is the absence, actually, that we are in now today, that continue to really just cycle of trafficking and re-trafficking. Will they go home? Will they be re-trafficked again? And so on. So it's a cycle globally.
Yeah, I think Klara made that point, that the system then becomes part of the whole cycle of abusing these people. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I have to bring it to an end there, but a fantastic panel. We could have gone on for another half an hour easily. So please, round of applause for our panel.